Perfect. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Design Meets. My name is Ian Chalmers. I'm the founder of Design Meets and will be your host for the event today. Before we get started, I'd just like to read a land acknowledgement. As an essential step towards reconciliation, we acknowledge that our studio is located on the treaty land of the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation, an area in which the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, the Anishinaabe have thrived through time. We respect our collective responsibility to protect and nurture the land and recognize the legacies of colonial histories. We are grateful to share this land as treaty people who work, live, and learn in the community with one another. I'd like to thank sponsors and supporters, Pivot Design Group, for their ongoing support. I'd like to thank Swipe Books in Toronto for donating our raffle prizes today, and RGD, the Registered Graphic Design Association of Canada, who has promoted this and to which I'm also a proud member. I'd love to say, put up your hands. Who's been to a Design Meets before? Or put up your thumbs, I suppose I could say. This is not that this is new for me, but our last event was in person. Nice to have you all here. We've been doing this since 2010, so hopefully some of you have been to our event. It is a community platform for exchanging ideas, for inspiring one another, a way to collaborate, a way to connect with your peers, and a way to use design and its transformative power in our day-to-day. We've hosted many events on topics such as design research, circular design, sustainability, climate action, healthcare, journalism, life-centered design, DEI, collaboration. Recently, we held one in person on AI and design and governance. And one of the most memorable ones, and relatable to this, Rick, you'll appreciate, we held an event for Marshall McLuhan's centenary in 2011 at his coach house at U of T. It was 51 degrees out. There was a single air conditioner, and a group of his students and others gathered as we read some of McLuhan's prompts. It was quite a memorable one, especially when his cake started to melt. In today's session, I will interview Rick about this important and timely book, Why Graphic Culture Matters. This is a book I came across on Instagram through a colleague of mine, Benedita, and when I saw the cover, I was like, I have to read this book. This sounds really fascinating to me. And as I dove into it, I was very inspired and challenged about my occupation and where I am in my career. So thanks for doing that, Rick. After the interview with Rick, we'll take some questions, so please feel free to post them in the chat. It's possible we'll run out of time, so we'd like to test a new idea with the group here and maybe crowdsource some of your thoughts and comments. So if anyone has any additional thoughts on this topic that we discussed today, feel free to email us at DesignMeets in a short 150-word, it could be under 150-word insight, and we'll feature them in the upcoming recap, and then perhaps regroup for another session. We are recording this event and posting a human written and human visual summary design piece. In addition, we'll be raffling off 5 books generously provided by Swipe in Toronto. Thank you for that. And you must be in the meeting to be eligible for an entry. So we'll be doing that towards the end. So welcome to our event on why graphic culture matters. This is a significant topic, and I'm excited to be here with you. Thank you for joining us and booking a ticket. My name is Ian Chalmers. I will be your host. I'd like to introduce Rick Poynor. Rick is a writer, a critic, a lecturer, a curator who specializes in design, photography, and visual culture. He was recently a design and visual culture professor at the University of Reading in the UK. He is also the founder of I Magazine, sorry, Rick, in London and current co-founder of the Design Observer. He's also written, I'm told, 20 books or so. So when you see Rick's background, it's not fake. The book. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the book if you haven't had a chance to read it yet. Why Graphic Culture Matters. This is a collection of over 45 essays written by Rick about art, design, and visual communication. The book covers the commercial takeover of design, design criticism, history, the interplay of word and image, design celebrity, the canon, graphic authorship, critical forms of practice, and the enduring intimacy between art and design. Welcome, Rick. Thank you for writing this book. As I mentioned before, it was quite provocative as a designer, design owner, design entrepreneur. It took me down some rabbit holes and sort of refreshed and reminded me on why we are doing this, and definitely provided some inspiration. So first question for you, Rick, is what motivated you to republish your essays in this book? Why now?
Well, first, I'd just like to thank you for all of what you just said there, Ian, and thank you for inviting me on to DesignMeets. It's always an honor and a privilege to be invited to do these kind of conversations and to meet the public. If only I could actually meet the listeners. But anyway, thank you everyone for coming. Yes, the book. You've already summarized it quite neatly. Book of essays, yes. Written over time. In fact, these essays go back over about 20 years to the start of this century. I've actually published 3 volumes of essays before, so this is not new for me, and it's something I like doing. But I haven't done it for a long time. In fact, the last volume of essays was back in 2006. So I had a big backlog of material, and I was aware that I should probably do something with it, but I didn't for a long time. And then it reached the point where it seemed timely to gather things together. And it meant I could look back over this time quite a long and large body of writing and select what I thought might stand up to republication. And I'm very aware, I've always been aware, that if you take something, kind of, it's off the shelf, out of history, it's in the past, it had its moment, it was published, and now you're deciding to do that again, then you have to ask yourself why you're doing it, what your motivation is, and whether this material is relevant. Ultimately, I can't be the person who decides that. That's for the reader to decide whether it is relevant, but I have to feel comfortable with the idea of bringing it back again. The interesting thing for a writer doing something like this, especially when it covers, as I say, the best part of 2 decades, is you look for and hope to find patterns in your own work. I'm aware of certain pet themes which I return to again and again and again. Here's a chance to see how these various investigations of a particular theme stand up next to each other. Are they coherent? Do they add to each other? Yeah, it's very much the making of the book is a kind of process of self-inquiry. For anyone who, and it may be a lot of people who don't really know my writing, I've always tried to be, well, in a word, critical. And when I say critical, I don't in any way mean negative. I don't see criticism as a negative process, although obviously if someone criticizes something we've said or our behavior or something, we take it personally. But when it comes to art and graphic communication, visual communication, I think that the subject matter is enriched. I hope it's enriched by the process of criticism. I enjoy reading other people's criticism. That applies not just in graphic design, but to other areas. I like art criticism, I like film criticism, I like literary criticism, I like almost all forms of criticism. And the reason for that is because someone, the writer, is having to think very hard about their own reactions to the work that they're looking at. And in the process of doing that thinking and then setting down the thoughts, they supply you, the reader, with something to use to examine your own thinking. We've already had that experience where sometimes you read something and you think, well, yeah, I kind of get that, but this is going a bit further. This is taking the subject in a direction I hadn't thought of. So in other words, the writing is an aid to thinking. In the end, although someone like me writes it, it's about the reader. It's about what the person reading makes of it. So for me, that process, both as reader, even before I was a writer, but of exploring an aspect of the world, in this case, graphic communication, graphic design, the visual landscape, photography and illustration and moving image as part of that process of graphic communication, exploring all of that just enriches the subject. So that's what I aim to do with the book. I hope that the book is, well, it's a much abused word, but I hope it's accessible. These pieces are meant to be lively, provocative, entertaining as well. I hope there's a bit of humor at times. Even if the ideas are important, I don't want any of this to sound stodgy or well, if I say academic, I'm not criticizing academia, but you know what a serious academic essay sounds like. And it's very much often for the specialist, but I mean my pieces to be for actually anyone who cares to read them. That includes designers, obviously, as the key audience. But I write them in a way that I hope would appeal to anyone. And that's a technique that I've learned from journalism. And I think anyone who's involved in journalistic communication does aspire to that kind of accessibility.
Great explanation. And this is, by the way, this is the size of the book. I was surprised when I got it. It was actually, well, it was a relief because it meant I could read it, take it with me and read it anywhere on the TTC or the transit, or I could just read it on the go. But they're very digestible. I think you achieved these quick ideas sort of chunked out in a way that you can stop, pause, and take it with you, and then come back to another one. So, and it is funny. I mean, you've got a whole thing on empty buzzwords and calling out bullshit on design jargon. So there's there's a lot of fun that can be gained and gathered through the chapters. So thank you for that. Let's go on, because this is one that Rick, you and I, we didn't talk upon because it's so obvious, but then you reminded me, it's like, let's talk about, why is this called graphic culture? Why have you used the term in the book's title? What is graphic culture and why is it valuable? And I think this is a really critical part to this book, and expectations, and what our readers will get out of this.
Yeah, I believe that's true, that this thing I'm calling graphic culture is very important. It's important in the wider culture, and it's obviously important to us as people who are on the design scene, working in the design area, producing design and graphic communication. What I mean by it, though, well, actually, the best way of explaining is to say, let's step back a bit and talk about what visual culture is. This is a term that gets thrown about. There's even a branch of study within the universities now called visual culture. It's also sometimes called visual studies, but it's much the same thing. And visual culture as a discipline set out to establish itself as something distinct from the obvious visual study, which is art history. So art history goes all the way back to the 19th century as a more formal kind of inquiry. Visual culture seeks to examine almost everything that's visual that isn't fine art, although you can tackle fine art as part of visual culture, but it seeks to be a kind of concurrent or adjacent discipline, as I say, covering everything that is not art. So, of course, that's the entire visual world. That would include some kinds of photographs, it would include publishing, it would include information graphics. It would actually, in theory, include graphic design, though strangely, when you look at books about visual culture, graphic design, as we, as design people understand it, is barely addressed. And I've actually raised that point in some of my writing. To me, it's very curious. Why is there a blind spot in this study of visual culture about graphic design? Anyway, to come back to the title, the point here is to say, well, let's look at graphic culture, the graphic part of visual culture, to zero in on that, actually, in a way, to do the kind of work and the thinking and the writing that seems to be missing from visual culture as a branch of academic study. So that explains how graphic culture fits in visual culture. Obviously, the really key word here that we need to think about is culture. What do we mean by culture? Now, what I've always tried to do in writing about graphic design is not, and this is very deliberate, not to write about it as business. When I started, which is a long time ago, back in the 80s, there were lots of magazines in Britain where I work about visual communication and graphic design and so on. And they were written like business publications, even though they were very visual and they addressed designers, they were concerned with the whole business of being a designer as a job, winning clients, doing work for clients, and they tended to write from that perspective. Well, even back then, and like I say, this is back at the end of the 80s, I thought, but surely this graphic work that we're talking about as a kind of business practice, surely it's part of visual culture. Surely it is a form of culture. And if it is, then it's significant in the way any other form of visual culture is significant, whether it's art, whether it's photography, whether it's documentary filmmaking. Why can't we talk about this graphic culture or graphic design as culture in the same kind of inquiring and serious way? And I've just stuck with that. All these years, I've stuck with it. I thought there are plenty of journalists writing about the business side of design. I'm not very interested in that. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to come at the subject from this other direction. And it was always my hope. I really can't say even now whether this worked, whether this really happened or not, but it was always my hope that we could establish graphic design, because it was really graphic design I was addressing back then, as a very meaningful and valuable and vibrant form of culture in its own right. And it was always my hope it would be possible to write about the products of graphic culture for a wider audience. And as I said earlier, that explains the approach I took, the particular style in which I write, the aim to be accessible to people who are not experts or specialists. Of course, over time, again, it seemed to me, it did become slightly easier to do this because the public, through desktop technology, through using software that in essence was design software, the kind of popular public version of things that techniques and processes that were once solely the province of designers, through all that, the public started to become more familiar with the process of graphic communication. Things have shifted in a particular direction. I think these days what people know about is type, though of course, they always refer to fonts rather than typefaces. But people have become very sensitive to type and what we would call typography and typographic effects and the particular atmosphere or meaning that you can produce with particular typefaces. People are sort of familiar with that. People have favorite typefaces, of course, that they pick from the font menu. There's a book which I mention in Why Graphic Culture Matters, which is a British book called Why Fonts Matter. And in part, in choosing the title, I was responding to that because I wanted to pull back and say, well, it's not just fonts, is it? It's the whole attempt at graphic communication. So I hope that's clear. What I'm saying is that graphic design is a form of culture. And these essays from different perspectives try and say why this culture matters, which is obviously something I believe. I'm still waiting to see actually whether graphic designers and graphic communicators respond to this word or this term graphic culture, or whether they think, well, that's a bit odd. What exactly is that? It seemed to me it should be instantly understandable. It should make sense. For me, the jury's out. I'm not yet convinced from feedback on the book that that really is the case. If it isn't the case, then I hope the book is helping to make that argument.
Excellent. That's a great explanation. It's in your book too. You bring up, and I laugh and this, you date yourself when you pull out this book. I love artifacts. I like physical books. Philip Megg's book, and I think any designer that's here today I'm sure you have this, and this is the first edition, so that's 1983, 84. And the epilogue, of course, he says, as I publish this book, technology is coming, microprocessors, we have to start thinking like systems designers. We have to start, looking at culture. So it was really fascinating to your reference to that book, just brought it all back and realize how important this conversation is today.
That
Let's
was
move
a
on to
really important book.
yeah,
I've got to say, since you bring up Megs, that
yeah,
was a really important book for me because that's my entry point as someone, perhaps people don't realize this, who is not a designer. I'm not a designer. I
right.
studied art history. I was interested in visual things. I love photography. I found my way into design or into the subject of design. I wasn't in the field. And getting that book for my birthday back in soon after it came out in 83, it was like a door to the subject. The fact that you could talk about graphic design in this serious historical way. And here were all these fantastic examples which
So
Max
many.
had researched and assembled. So yeah, since then, many people have kind of gone back to that book and they wanted to revise the history. They've talked about what he left out, what he didn't cover. But nevertheless, of course, you'd expect the subject to advance. But nevertheless, the impact of that book, I think, was huge in the English speaking design world. All credit to Megs. That was a very important
Absolutely.
work.
And it's still going in its sixth edition, I believe.
Yeah.
So, well, let's move on to our next question because I feel like we could talk about one of these questions for another 20 minutes. But let's talk about the importance of criticism and reading. And we highlighted reading here, but criticism too. So, two topics of interest. So, in the book, you talk about the importance of critical writing and deep, what you say, deep reading. You actually said this in our conversation last week too, and how they're vital to design and sort of our cultural fields. They sort of help us with awareness. They refine or help us establish our values, make decisions, take action on the future, and help shape mentality and make us better designers. Can you expand on the critical topic of writing and deep reading?
Well, that's a good summary of what I just said, actually, Ian. I think
Well, I know it's hard.
you've almost encapsulated the whole thing. But yeah, I think, well, anyone who's listening who knows me, but probably it'll be clear anyway from seeing me and what I'm saying. I've been around in the field a long time. And my perception of where we are now is inevitably shaped by living all those years of adult life, all those decades, through an entire working career. And so I have to say, this issue of reading seems to me, at this point now, but I'm aware it's an old timer saying it, but it seems to me as critically important as ever, and possibly more important than ever, because my entire sense of how you go about understanding and then once you've understood, critiquing the world comes from reading. And if there isn't reading, if we take that away, I don't really know how one learns to do that process, because my experience, again, I won't surprise you to hear, I'm a person who loves to talk. So I don't have a problem with talking, and I don't have a problem expressing my ideas with talking. But I know as a writer that despite my best efforts, I do it so much better on the page. And that's entirely what I'd say you should expect and what I would expect, because of course, what I'm doing now is I'm making it up in the moment, and I hope the ideas I have are coming across reasonably well. But when I write, when I sit there on my own for hours at a time, reflecting on the research I've done and what I've thought about and all the things I've seen, and pulling examples together, choosing some things, deciding other examples aren't so good, refining the words, in other words, of course, it gets better. It gets better and better and better the more thoughtfully you refine your work, because all writers know this. It's really not about just slamming down the first draft and saying, job done and walking off. You go back to your work and you refine it, you polish it. You may change your mind entirely about some things you've written and rewrite them entirely. There are many ways of revising your text, but it gets better. So that's the writing process. Before any of that can happen, to go back to reading, there needs to be a lot of reading. And again, I came from a world, this is a pre-digital world, in which the way that you absorbed serious quantities of information was through reading. Yes, there were books, but there were also newspapers, very important, and many, many magazines. And the middle of the 20th century, all the way through to the 60s, was the heyday of the magazine. So I kind of came in on the tail end of that. I loved magazines. It's why I wanted to work in magazines, why I chose journalism as a career. So again, everything I'm doing has been about reading to learn and to understand, and then learning how to write, how to express things yourself. So, I'm giving you a bit of my background.
Yes.
Because all of this is what I bring to the process of writing about design. Going way back at the start of it all for me in the 80s, I'd read a lot of music writing and I'd read a lot of film writing. And even though I'd studied art and art history, those two forms of writing were particularly significant for me. The reason I'm singling them out rather than art is I like the way that film writers who wrote for magazines, newspapers, as well as books, and music writers were very directly engaged with popular culture on the one hand, because everyone goes to films and everyone listens to records, and also with their audiences. That somehow with the art writing, there was the feeling at times it was a bit more ivory tower. And I like this idea of engagement with popular culture. So when it came to design and design writing, it seemed to me those were really good models. And there was a lot more film and music writing to be inspired by and to learn from. And there were more writers operating at a high level of critical thinking and even literary expression. There were more of those writers in those fields than there were in design. So I looked constantly to film writing and music writing for examples to learn from. And I would stick with that. Even now, I would stick with it, although obviously a lot of time's passed and there's more design writing today. Still, and I think this is a kind of rude awakening for design people, perhaps people who are just in the design bubble. They studied design and they work in design and they think about design and everything's about design. And yeah, they're aware of things elsewhere, but they don't really read those subjects and perhaps they're not bothered or interested in the criticism. But if you go into, well, just an ordinary bookshop and look at and I'm talking about big bookshop, look at the art section, the music section, the film section, you find way more books about those subjects than about design. There's just more publishing going on. There are more writers in the field. And the consequence of all of that over the decades is that the standard, because it's so competitive, because these are fields people want to be in, has been pushed higher and higher. It's very high. So the question always for people in design and design writing is, does our writing measure up to the standards established in those other subjects? And I know in talking like this, I've got to say, I rarely hear my design colleagues saying anything remotely like this, which is sort of why I'm saying it again today, because we have to get our standards from somewhere. And for me, it was in those fields. When it comes to criticism, I won't go on too long about this, to say a few more words. When it comes to criticism, it's very reasonable for anyone listening to this or any writer talking about design criticism to say, well, why do we need that? Why do we need it? We've got our work, we've got the field, we have our conferences, we talk to each other, we know what the subject involves. Why do we need this additional design criticism? Well, I've sort of referred to that earlier. It's about thinking more deeply. Design criticism is the place where, whether the writer is a designer, and many graphic design writers actually come from graphic design. They're designers, so of course they know the subject very well. And a few are like me, they've come from other areas and they've learned about it. They're more from the writing side, but still they understand the subject. All of those people are engaged in digging deeper, in going down into the subject and perhaps asking questions about it, which in the normal way of things, like, when you hear people talking about their own work at a design conference, that's the typical thing with design conferences, as you all know. You all go along and you've got these big name designers, maybe they're more representative in their kind of spread now, more people of color, certainly more women on stage, so it's getting more representative, but the form is always I'm successful in the field and here's my work and I'm going to tell you all about my work for 45 minutes, and then at the end you might get a few admiring questions. Well, we can go on like that forever, but the field won't really advance if we do, because that's not what criticism is about. I would like to see people standing up there talking about work, design work, bodies of work, individuals' work, in the way that we might talk about art from the past. It's not about self-presentation, self-promotion, getting on in careers. All the artists, they're all dead anyway now. They're gone. So we can return critically to think about the work they were doing. It's
Right.
that kind of inquiry that I think will advance the field.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Um, Again, I think there are opportunities to go on about this subject, but it's already 1:34. I'd love to move on to the next one. Thank you for that, Rick. I did want to point out that there is an abundance of content out there today with all the different platforms with LinkedIn. There's probably a lack of criticism from designers to other designers. There's a lot of liking. I love this idea of more engagement and more discourse. So let's hope that we can get there. But on that note of talking about online platforms, let's talk about your subject on the lure of digital control, this one is very timely, and which is why I think that your essays were as relevant as they were then as they are today. So in your book, you talk about how the graphic design as a professional activity is now so heavily invested in technology, so dependent at every level that non-digital design is unthinkable. The designer has become an operator. In your book, you also say the practice used to be more inventive, and you've kind of touched upon this already, more unpredictable, more vibrant, more accessible. And of course, we could talk about this, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of feedback about this, but do you want to expand on that idea of this resisting the lure of digital control?
Yeah, this idea is explored in an essay in the book called Design as Dictator. And I forget actually the year in which I wrote it, but it's a long time ago. And I think I wrote that even before social media had arrived, but absolutely at the point where not only were all designers using digital technology had become fundamental to the work, but now everyone was using the internet. Was the great new age of web design, and we'd made the shift, this cultural shift from an analog world to a digital one.
Mm.
What I was pointing out in the essay, and this isn't going to surprise anyone at this point in 2024, but I was saying this way back. It seemed to me that all of these forms of digital technology contained the possibility, well, not just of control, or the feeling that we were being controlled by the technology, but ultimately, of course, and this is the world we're in now, of surveillance through technology. So on the one hand, the technology appears to be fantastically liberating. You can do things that weren't even within your sphere previously. You had to go out to, for typesetting to a set of experts with the technology, to the typesetting technology, and you specified what you wanted, exerting control, of course. They then delivered it back to you, and off you went. I'm simplifying a lot. We can't get into the history of typesetting here. But now suddenly we could do these things ourselves, and the designer was taking on new tasks and acquiring new skills, becoming actually a typesetter, doing the typesetting as part of the job of just being a designer. So exerting greater control over the process of work. And as all this unfolded, it just became clear that we'd constructed a perfect system with our digital working environment in which, in the end, we served the machinery. You know, we thought it was serving us, but we served it. And there was no outside. In the end, there was no other way of doing it. That design had come from a very kind of physical background. Even in my lifetime, you know, I remember going into studios where graphic work was being done in the early 80s, and they were still sticking down galleys. It might be film setting, and it might have been produced by digital film setters, so there was a digital component, but the outcome was physical. It was paper, and you cut it up. You cut those columns up and you stuck them down on a grid, and you did everything else on the physical artwork, and then you built up these layers, the color separations, and you marked that it was all kind of done on the basis of understanding what the repro house would produce, but you marked up the colors you wanted, all of the Pantone numbers and all of this. But it was very, very physical. And a designer who I've written about, like Vaughan Oliver, in the early 90s would kind of almost mournfully say about for him, design was about the piece of type on the end of the scalpel and teasing it into position on the artwork. And he was finding it very hard to adjust to this new digital world. Well, like I say, we left all that behind. In a way, it was marvelously straightforward, marvelously free, marvelously tactile. Design itself was a different kind of work. You push things around with your fingers on a surface. You used your own eye to judge exactly where something went. And when you look at old artwork, you can see tiny imperfections. Well, there's no chance of that now. Everything snaps to grid. Everything is exactly where the machine was designed to put it. And we all sit there producing this perfect, seamless work. It's absolute visual perfection. We expect nothing less. More and more high resolution, more and more perfect. It just goes on and on. And all the time, we're being sucked down deeper into this digital environment in which some of our options have been expanded, but others have been restricted. So I don't know if I've quite got there and explained what I'm getting at. I'm saying that the gains we've made also come at certain costs. So that's part of the answer. You, Ian, were also referring to this question of whether the work itself has changed as a result. Do you want me to address that or not?
No, that's a fair point. And when we had our chat last week too, we didn't want to use the two-letter word, but it ended up coming up in conversation, and I can say that it's really poignant. I think this idea of digital control, even though we're in it, a lot of people are in it and don't know. The natives, that's all they know. But how will this, future of, automation and machine learning, virtual realities, affect the up and coming designers? What anxiety do they have about, resistance is futile in a way? Is there a way for them to still get some analog in their life, to
Well,
be creative,
this is why I use the word control. Why, it seems quite
Yes.
a heavy word, because yeah, I'm thinking about what you're saying. And in fact, the problem is that you feel there is no alternative and you must submit to this enormous juggernaut of technological change. And you feel, this doesn't affect me personally because I'm not a designer, but I guess people feel that everything is fluid, everything is melting, everything is changing. And I must engage with this. I must learn about it. I must participate. I must use it, or I will go under. And other people competitors out there in the design world who've made the adjustment, the adaptation, have learned how to play this new game or version of the game, they will then succeed. So it's peer pressure.
Mhm.
It's absolutely a case of fear of missing out. It's all of that, and in the end, we rush forward. Or actually, it's not rushing forward. We are being sucked forward into it as though the argument is one. There isn't no alternative. The future will be like this. It's
Mhm.
pointless to resist. Um, and what happens there is the very opposite of what I've just been talking about.
Mhm.
Any opportunity for critical reflection on what's going on, what its value is, what its usefulness is, what the meaning of it all is, where it leaves us at the end of this process of now adaptation to let's use the word artificial intelligence. Yes, that's where we are right now. It's happening. We're in it. It's not even science fiction in the future. We're now living it and
Mhm.
doing it. Um, and there seems like there's even less opportunity to
Mhm.
step back, say, wait a minute,
Well,
I need to think this through for myself. I need to
it's
find a position of my own. But it won't surprise you to learn that's what I'm for. That's what I think we should be doing. And we're
yeah.
lost if we don't.
You said something quite poignant when we spoke, and I wish we saved it. And I'm sure this happens all the time. You say something and then you change it, or you find a new way to articulate it. But you were talking about the process and how, as you know, with the use of these automation tools, that what could happen is we lose our ability to live through to experience the process of design and in articulation and installation and synthesizing and ideation, all the things that might happen if we automate that. And we arrive at the end and then say, this is what we learned, and we design that in a way that's very salient and understandable, but we forgot how we got there. We don't have any memory of that experience or any deep connection to why, we arrived
No,
anyway. It was
because we handed it over to AI to do it
We
for us.
handed it over. Yeah.
And I in on Monday I thought, oh, I better put something on LinkedIn. So there I am on LinkedIn. Put something about the event, and I hadn't done a post for a while, so that I immediately noticed a change. It asked me the second I went to make my post. It asked me if I wanted AI to do it for me.
Right, to write it for
I mean,
you.
like, so so here we are on LinkedIn, which is supposedly where competent professional people seek high paid employment for their expertise. And if you can't write a 50-word post, well, go back to school. That would be absurd. But already we've got a tool that says, hey, I'll do it for you. And when
Right.
you've typed, I did not want that, of course.
I
When
know.
you've typed up your post, it then offers to, I forget the term it uses, it doesn't say rewrite, but basically, review that and redo it for you. And I can see already all those kind of people who are really, I'm not using LinkedIn to find a job, but the people who are kind of in the job market on LinkedIn are already using AI tools
Yes.
to write their resumes and all the rest of it. So
Mhm.
the problem with all of that is, and this will also apply to design, that when as a viewer you encounter whatever it is, the text, the graphic communication, now even less than before, when these things were anonymous, you have no sense of where it's coming from. It's almost like it's instantly not trustworthy.
Mhm.
Because frankly, if I was an employer, I absolutely wouldn't want to be taking on people who relied on AI to do the job for them. But also actually happening is that because of this kind of being sucked forward into this thing, everyone is making simultaneously, it seems, is making this adaptation and saying, I got to use these tools. So to come back to your point, about how we learn to do things, uh,
Yes.
how we ever get there is precisely through doing it for ourselves. If we start subcontracting the work from
Yes.
school, because people are using this in high school now as well.
Everyone's using
High schools are accepting they're going
it's
to have to
it's a
just go
challenge.
with the flow.
I think, well,
This is making a nonsense of education,
I
isn't
didn't
it?
want to turn it into an AI talk, and I know you
Yeah,
said that.
but
We
you
both
did.
agreed, but I did. I did because I think that there is at some point it will be a reflection of culture too, maybe not a graphic reflection. And we are running out of time. So let's not go down that as a rabbit hole, an unnecessary rabbit hole at the moment. But I'm more interested in your, I think, Rick, this is much more a much more interesting topic on the soft power of design, the power of design, the soft power of design. And you mentioned, in the book, one of your essays about the responsibility or role of designers and what they can wield, this sort of soft power, this awareness. And it's mostly, those of you out there, if you feel this way, if you feel disempowered by your client's work, there is an opportunity for you to wield this power, and there is climate anxiety for a lot of young people. Well, you can become a climate designer. You can inherit new processes of human-centered design is now humanity-centered design. You can do sustainable design. There are many ways, and I think this is what you were getting at, and I just wasn't sure if you wanted to, let's just say we have a couple of minutes to
Okay.
summarize that.
Yeah, I like this term soft power. Many people might know that it actually comes from diplomacy. So this idea that a country, could be Canada, could be Britain, exerts soft power in the world as opposed to hard political or economic power. It exerts soft power through making a cultural contribution. So we come back to culture. So what I was saying in the essay about the power, it's called The Power of Design in the book, is that designers sometimes talk as though, well, it's only about doing work for the client, and the client supplies the content, and I do a job of work for the client, and I don't have any responsibility for the messages that I design because they came from the client and not from me. And I was really saying that design wasn't a way of exercising soft power through your actions, your choices, your decisions, your work as a designer. And I'll repeat the word responsibility, that even if you didn't come up with the message by choosing to work at a particular company, and you may have good reasons, you need the money, etc., but still you're at the company is doing this work, and you are responsible in the end for your own choices as a worker. You are. You are. And especially if you're a highly trained designer, there are still, even now in the age we're talking about, there's still many, many opportunities to express your priorities, your values, your interests and concerns through the kind of design you're doing. So I'm calling that soft power. You're not the company owner, you're not necessarily the owner of uh, the communication. You're producing it for someone else, though you're being paid nicely to do that. But still, this is a form of power. And it's a kind of power we might compare to the power of a journalist, or a broadcaster, or a documentary filmmaker. These are all people who produce messages that go out into the world and influence the public. And designers are in that category. Being, as I say in the essay, being a designer is not like delivering the mail. I mean, if you think there might be things in the mail that you wouldn't agree with, well, you will just don't take the job if that you're going to worry about that. But no, in practice, the mail person does not worry about it. That's not part of the scope of their work. They're in no sense in control of the content. As I say, designers are. So that makes designers very, very privileged, and it means they do exercise a form of power.
Excellent. Well, that was nice and sweet and short, as difficult as it is, but it's a very inspiring idea. So thank you for bringing that up. Again, to everyone here, you really need to read this book because there is so much more that Rick has put into it. What I think we have time for a few questions, Rick, if you're up for it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Let's see if I don't know if we have to turn that on, Lauren, or it just automatically happens, but I don't see anything at the moment. maybe you've answered everyone's questions. And if not, I definitely have I have a couple things to ask you. While we're waiting, I was going to ask, what do you hope readers to take away from reading? Like we've talked, you read the book there as you end the final segment on the future, which is a number of essays or summaries there. What do you hope people to take? Oh, there's a question. What do you hope them to take away from reading this book? In short.
I would like
Oh, sorry, Rick, you're
to take away the relating and yeah, exciting to do and also to think about.
Lauren, did we get that? I noticed it broke up a little bit. Do we want Rick to repeat it?
Yeah, broke up for me too.
Sorry, Rick.
If
Do
you
you
could
mind just
repeat
repeating that?
please?
Wow. Has it been clear up until
Clear
now?
up to that point.
Okay, yes. I very simply, I was saying I would like people to come away from the book with a sense of the design field, the visual communication field, the graphic culture that surrounds us as being stimulating, complex, multi-leveled, something that we can explore, think about, criticize, uh, and talk about in a more informed way. I hope I've done that in the book. Again, it's really not for me to say, but that's what I hope is there and what I hope readers get from it. And yes, in the end, I hope it's stimulating, and I hope actually it holds people's attention, that it's entertaining at times, that it's provocative, that it's fun as well as interesting.
There is an interesting question. There's two here that speak to sort of something you'll find of interest. From Jason, Dunn and Raby proposed many critical design issues through their work, which was mounted in the context of art of the art gallery. How might design and art combine to push through outdated conceptions of how graphic design might provide value to our contemporary world?
That's a really interesting question. In the book, I do talk about Dunn and Raby, who were quite influential on my own thinking when they appeared at the end of the 90s. And of course, their key influence was in the industrial design world, so three-dimensional design rather than graphic design. Again, in the book, I talk about a moment, which is around about 2007, where some graphic designers started to engage with the idea of critical design. The point about critical design, for anyone who hasn't heard about it, and really in graphic design, the term didn't take off. It's not really widely understood now. But the idea was to create projects based on one's research, where the outcome was a kind of critical proposal about what design might be capable of doing, and about the role of design in society. As I said, I think very few graphic designers have really got on board with that. Even some of the people who were put under that heading of critical designers seemed very uncomfortable with the term. They didn't like it much. Before long, new terms were being used: speculative design, design fiction was another associated term. I think it's a shame. I thought it was a really helpful concept from Dunn and Raby, and I wanted to see designers apply it and explore it in a more systematic way, and that didn't happen. I covered the question. Outdated conceptions. Well, yeah, I mean, we could say a heck of a lot about outdated conceptions of graphic design. Again, I hope that I'm coming from exactly the stance that the question seems to conjecture about. My interests have been shaped by, I haven't really talked about it, but a background in looking at art, certain assumptions I brought into design myself from art. Then I was quite deliberately looking for designers who had that kind of broader awareness. This is long before critical design was formulated as an idea. And all the way through, it's been designers who are in a slightly ambiguous position somewhere between art and design as we traditionally understand them. Those are the ones that are interesting to me, because it seems to me this is such fertile territory. And I'm
Absolutely.
absolutely committed to the idea of the designer who brings ideas, motivation, knowledge, purposes of their own to the medium of design. This idea of authorship in design or through design, all fascinating to me and all covered in the book, I must say.
That's right. Which you can purchase either at Swipe Bookstore in Toronto or online. A couple more questions, if you don't mind. We'll just keep them short, but these are fascinating. Hi, Rick. Thank you for the talk. Do you think there's a way to engage graphic design students to read more, be more critical if they do not have to write essays?
Sure, I can't see that question.
Yeah, you can see that there from Zanar.
Which one? Oh, Zanar in the middle. Sorry.
Yes.
A way to engage graphic design students to read more, be more
Oh,
critical
there's
if
quite a
they do
few.
not have to write essays. Well, this sounds like you're very aware, Zanar, of what happens in design education, where students, whether they want to or not, are absolutely required to engage critically with the subject matter and to write essays. And when I was at the University of Reading till recently, I was responsible for a module called Design Thinking, and that's exactly what happened. The designers, graphic designers, had to read, they had to think, they had to give presentations about what they found, and ultimately they had to write a long essay. And some of them found that very congenial and they were really good at it, and others always found it a harder task. I do think for many designers, uh, um, critically inclined designers, thoughtful designers, designers who see the connections between design and the rest of the world, are always boosted in their thinking, in their way of considering the subject by this kind of study, reading, critical thinking, and often with writing as an outcome or part of the process. I think it's inevitable. It's what writing's for. Writing is thinking. So if you engage with that, you will sharpen up your thinking. You will get better at thinking. How do we encourage people to do that? Well, again, I would regularly encourage my students to do it, just hoping for the best. But I got to say, and this is a whole other subject, there's only so much time in your day. And if, say, you're determined to give hours to social media, then that's hours you won't spend reading. In the end, you have to make your choices about what's important to you and what you think you'll learn from.
Right.
We tried to impart the idea that reading was extremely valuable. And I believe from what students have told me that a lot of them take that on board and go with it. But some
Yes.
people, I dare say, we just don't.
Oh, sorry, Rick, was that it?
Yeah,
Oh,
finished.
might
Did
have
it
cut
drop
it off.
out again?
A tiny bit, but you actually else was heard. So
Okay.
we are at two. There are some great questions. Suman, Stephen, Dean, Pedro, Derwin. Great. I'm not sure if we can get to these, but we also wanted to raffle off the ticket. Now we're not going to make the raffle a big deal here, but do we have the names of the lucky ones who will get? There's 5 copies from Swipe. And I wonder, Rick, if we could we could take these questions offline and we could reply to our audience members with some answers potentially in a few weeks' time.
Yeah, sure. I mean,
If you're
let's
up for
look
it.
at what we've got and see what we can do. That'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Um,
and everyone, thank you for your questions.
let's see who do we have the names?
Yes, I'm going to share my screen with the lucky winners here.
Great. I
Are we
haven't.
ready?
Why not? Oh, look
Here
at
are the winners.
Hey.
Peter Scott, Derwin, substitute. Okay. Well, it's funny because Peter and I share a studio space, so that's very convenient. He can have his own copy. Derwin, nice to see you there. And Suman, there you go. That's thanks for asking that question. As long as we have their email addresses, we can we'll coordinate with you and sort out where we have to mail this to. Let's go back to the screen. And I think that's it, Rick. And I really would love to get into these other questions, but we know people, there's only so much time in the day to
Yeah, it's your lunchtime, isn't it?
but yeah, it's a little past, but yes, it could be. It's a good time for tea, that's for sure. But
I mean, isn't the past hour was your lunchtime,
yeah,
wasn't it?
like 12,
Yeah,
12 to 1, and you're nearing your dinner time, I suppose, or tea.
it's true.
Um,
It's probably what I'll
so
do straight after. I'll have something to eat.
we have to listen, everyone. I'd love to thank Rick, especially for taking the time in his day, for writing this book, for provoking, for inspiring myself, and for provoking this idea. And we just reached out to the publisher, Occasional Papers, and they put us in. They asked Rick if it was okay that we reached out to him, and Rick, I guess, said yes. So then we reached out to Rick, and then we went back and forth, and we nailed down a date. So it was very, very generous of you to participate in this. So thank you for that. We do have a upcoming event, which is also kind of relatable too. Design fiction, Unearthing Tomorrow. That's on May 8th, so that's coming up soon. That's going to be, yes, virtual. The women's health, we are hoping to do in person. That would be in Toronto, but we're still waiting on a venue. And we're hoping to have one on industrial design, as industrial design as a topic is shifting away from the traditional area of just product design. It's moving into interaction design, experience design, service design. And Rick, while I'm talking, feel free to, if you want to reply to any of those people in the Q&A, feel free. And so we're hoping that some of you can join us for these upcoming events. Thank you for doing this. We do this platform merely because we want to stay connected to the community, the design community. We want to learn more and challenge ourselves about topics that we don't know about. So I think this is an important place to gather. So thank you for taking the time today, everyone. And we will be writing up a summary, and we'll be sending that out in the email to the Eventbrite registration list. Thanks again to Rick.
Many thanks. Many thanks,
Claps.
Ian.
Applause.
I
Yay.
enjoyed it. Lovely to be invited.
Oh, thank you for joining us. All right, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thanks for coming.